Hello, friends. I was just watching some political YouTube, which I don't usually do because I'm not like politically aligned. Like I'm aligned with life, right? With what promotes life in all its variegated forms, which also promotes a type of entelechy and wisdom. But you already know that. So it's just interesting because this particular person was talking about institutions, institutionalization, right, where bureaucracy serves, right, where it doesn't serve, right, and then the whole sort of, in my mind, the whole moral problem with institutions, or at least it's like one makes a moral sacrifice in order to institutionalize something, right? You might think that you're like almost doing the opposite, that by institutionalizing something, you are, putting more behind it, more morality behind it. And I suppose if it were like a living institution, which is something that we don't really have so much of these days, there might be some caveats that we could apply. But in general, right, when you institutionalize something, you are taking away moral responsibility for that thing from everyone, or perhaps a specific group of people, and basically mechanizing it, right? Flattening it out, leveling it so that it, will function as a machine does, will be, reliable, dependable, will always produce consistent results. Obviously, when it comes to things like our food system or other necessities, we would like things to be predictable. And we are, in fact, willing to sacrifice some degree of like overall freedom and agency in order to make sure that certain things like happen, right? But there is a cost. There's always a cost of institutionalizing anything because it removes things from the ability of individual people to make a moral decision regarding them, right? And like, for example, when it comes to something like charity, right? Like taking care of the poor and stuff, right? It's like, it's really weird. Because it's like, well, on the one hand, you want to say like, well, we've institutionalized taking care of the poor, right? So that like, I'm not individually, morally responsible for the charity decisions that I make. Rather, I just pay to like the charity tax. And then an institution like divides this stuff up. And so it's like, I myself am morally divorced from this. It's simply a financial transaction for me, right? I pay the poor tax. And that is as far as my thinking about it, my moral connection to it is concerned, right? Compare this to like, the church has always been part of this, has taken this function, but like in the old days where charity was sort of just given on an individual moral level, right? Where it's like you're walking past beggars in the street and you have to literally decide in the moment whether you're going to give your money away. And then you make a moral decision, and then you live with those consequences one way or another. Like that is a real thing that people do, and it challenges you to confront these things directly in the face and to decide, like out of your own conscience in that place and time, whether you will choose to be generous, compassionate, or whatever, like or not, because you're like, well, this is clearly a scam. I mean, there's but of course you can't fool an honest man, right? If you truly give something away, it's no longer your business what the hell they do with it. You've done your act. It's a gift, right? The gift frees you in that way. But in any case, it's like, well, Christ said, the poor you always have with you, right? You always have the poor with you, whatever it says. And that's kind of the point, right? Is that like poverty is initially descended from spiritual conditions, as is like wealth, right? So like poverty is ultimately a problem that can only be solved at a higher level than simply throwing money at it, because the problem in poverty isn't a lack of money, right? It's a different kind of problem, right? And I'm not trying to get all like, the secret here where it's like, you can just generate money, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, right, as you know, to some extent or another, reality is generated by you and your mentality and so forth. And I'm not simply talking about the mentality of poor people. I'm talking about the mentality of everyone else, right? But the point is that like the poor ye always have with ye one way or another. And it's like that is something that you must confront morally at a spiritual level, at the level of conscience, right? You can't just throw money at the problem and say like the poor are taken care of. Like they are poor. They will always be poor in this way, right? because of conditions that are karmic and other things that are not just a question of moving money around, right? But changing minds, souls, hearts, attitudes. And again, this has nothing to do with blaming victims, right? This is the situation that we've created, this churn, this push and pull, right? But of course, Christ didn't simply mean the economically poor. He meant poor in all kinds of different ways. And it's like, you must understand that like you as a human being on earth must confront scarcity yourself as a fully independent and autonomous person, not institutionally, right? You can't crouch behind your institutions and expect them to do moral lifting for you. It just can't work that way. An institution does not have morality. Only the people that run it do. Only humans are connected to that supernal moral realm. And so therefore, anything that causes humans to have to interact directly out of the moral realm, directly out of their own conscience, is what has the most value for the development of human beings and for the development of morality, like on the physical plane, right? Is to honor this individuation and this conscience, right? And try to make it more important, more valuable, right? Make the individual choice more impactful, but not in the like chintzy sense of like democracy where you throw a vote into a box, but in every instance to make the individual like thoroughly responsible for everything. And then having the idea that it's like, well, can we really rely on people to just sort of like give to the poor? And it's like, well, it kind of worked in the past, and it's like, maybe we could do more with it. But the only way to eliminate poverty is literally to adopt all of the freaking rules of Christianity, which no one in the world is ready for yet. And the threefold society is a freaking long ass way off. So I don't know. It's just interesting because, I used to be a little bit more in favor of institutions, right? But that was before I realized that like the moral spiritual realm is a real place from which real effects descend, and that you can't simply ignore it for convenience. But it's like, once you understand that things truly descend from the supernal realm to manifest here, then you know that you can't go hacking at the branches, right? Everything in the material realm is a branch, right? By the time you're hacking at that, you've already lost. You haven't located the spiritual seed that rooted the thing and gave birth to it, right? You have to work ahead of physical causes, right? And so that's one thing that an institution actually literally cannot do, because it is a mineralized mechanism. It just doesn't have the flexibility and speed to respond in real time the way that like a human or a small group of humans or even a large group of humans that has not become purely institutional and bureaucratic, right? So it's just like, we will have to make sacrifices. We will have to give away some conscience power, some morality in order to create the mechanisms that form our society. You can't do completely without these. I'm hardly advocating for anarchy, right? But the idea that anarchy is what results when people are thrown back on their individual moral conscience is one of these great lies, I think, that just is thrown about with wild abandon, right? And it's just like, our institutions are us. They're our shells, our corpses, our skeletons. Like, we cast them off behind us as we go. Like, they are not us, right? Civilizations come and go. Institutions come and go. Ironically, it's people, not individually, but as a whole, that live on and bring the old culture forward, but also innovate new aspects of culture. And institutionals are also enemies of innovation, because they work by virtue of the fact that they do not innovate, right? And again, if you say, well, there are institutions that innovate, then I would say, then we are working with something that's a hybrid kind of institution in the way that I mean something that is like a monument, right? And anyway, I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but I just thought that was interesting. And it's just, you have to remember, when you are institutionalizing things, you are making a moral trade, and something is being sacrificed from the human power set in order to achieve it. Again, this is often necessary, but you got to be aware of what you're doing, right? Thank you, friends. See you soon.